Okay, everyone. So we are starting our next pitch. We have sustainable sourcing. The sky is the limit. How can satellite forest monitoring boost zero deforestation, chocolate, and more? Turning over to you, Tracy, and Jean-Dominique.
Excellent, thank you. Deforestation-free supply chains are critical to low-emission development. Over the last few years, this issue has generated a high level of commitments from a lot of stakeholders, including companies, to stop deforestation and act to climate mitigation, forest impact, and social and environmental sustainability. They get involved in several initiatives and platforms, such as the New York Forest Declaration, the Tropical Forest Alliance, TFA, and the Cocoa Forest Initiative, CFI. They developed and implement non-deforestation policies and action plans. As an example, CFI, where the companies and also governments pledge to eliminate cocoa production in national parks, in line with stronger enforcement of national forest policies and alternative livelihoods for affected farmers. In order to demonstrate their successes in these pledges, they need to monitor where they are sourcing from, where their suppliers are sourcing from too, and also to identify the risky areas close to national park boundaries to avoid any encroachments in it. Some of these companies, such as Barry Callebaut, Olam, or Touton, are now collecting some GPS data through a smartphone application. So they are collecting, for example, polygons of the cocoa farms. They are also collecting some specific data linked to their own corporate sustainability purposes, such as the cocoa trees density or the other species planted in the cocoa plantation, the yield of the production, but also the treatment, the trainings that the farmers are receiving. In fact, all kinds of data which are linked to improve smallholder incomes and quality livelihoods. So the companies are making bold commitments, but they need partnership to succeed, with government support to change incentives on the ground, reinforce the forest governance, clarify the land use allocation, and financial initiatives linked to companies' footprint. They need also some support system for farmers to change practices, develop and implement cocoa agroforestry models to facilitate microfinance access, trainings on capturing these actions which are impacting on the ground, not only private companies, but across the whole sector. Because if some actors only are implementing this, the forest and the other players are not, we will still lose the forest.
Often in the same areas where companies are making bold commitments around their impact on forests and climate change, governments have also made commitments also around climate change mitigation, forest conservation, and sustainable development, including in sectors like agriculture. Governments have made these commitments in a number of platforms as well, most notably in the national determined contributions under the Paris Accord, where over 100 governments have made commitments around land use in their commitments to climate mitigation under the Paris Agreement. In the programs which Jean-Dominique and I here represent from the World Bank, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility and the Biocarbon Fund, governments have also made commitments around the REDD+ process, reducing emissions from tropical deforestation and degradation. And in our two programs, the Biocarbon Fund and the FCPF, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, 24 countries have the potential to earn results-based payments if they are able to demonstrate that they reduce their impact on forests and reduce the emissions that result. How does this work? Well, countries begin with a national process to address the emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And then most of them, in order to test approaches, they choose a smaller area, what we call a jurisdictional or a subnational program. And there they begin to implement activities on the ground to address deforestation. But before they can begin to implement, they need to first understand what's causing the deforestation, what are the drivers of forest loss in that area where they're focusing their efforts, and then develop specific strategies for addressing those particular drivers. And with many of the countries that we're supporting, those drivers are related in some way or another to agricultural commodity production. If the governments are able to succeed in reducing their emissions from deforestation and forest degradation below a set reference level, then they will be paid per ton of carbon emission reductions. And so the results-based finance can kick in for these programs to earn payments based on the results of their activities. But in order to be eligible for those payments, they have to be able to track, monitor, and report on those emission reductions. And so each of these governments is designing what we call an MRV system, monitoring, reporting, and verification. For the monitoring system, countries use a combination of land-based forest inventories and satellite monitoring, tailored to the drivers of forest loss, to the types of forests where these monitoring systems are placed, and to the land being monitored itself. And they collect information on where deforestation and forest degradation are happening, what kind of forest impact it is, who is causing the deforestation and degradation, and how it compares with past rates of deforestation. And finally, how this translates into carbon emissions that go into the atmosphere and cause climate change. On the reporting side, governments are reporting to the UN Climate Change Convention, and in the case of the countries supported by our two funds, they're also reporting to the World Bank in terms of the progress that they're making in these forest programs. And then finally, in the case of the FCPF and the Biocarbon Fund, verification is also required. Third-party verification must take place before payments are made, so there's a high level of transparency built around these programs as well. So in addition to the commitments that companies have made around sustainable commodity production, countries have also made bold commitments around forest conservation and sustainable production, but they also need partnerships in order to realize these commitments. Most countries don't have all of the finance that's needed to actually implement the activities and produce those emission reductions that will result in payments. There's a finance gap that's needed. In many cases, they want to see implemented on the ground the same types of activities that the companies will need to implement in order to meet their commitments. So there's a high level of overlap there. Governments are also often lacking in need of knowledge transfer in the best ways to work directly with farmers and how to incentivize farmers to improve practices and reach farmers in an efficient and effective way. And then finally, governments need implementers. They will set up the programs and the monitoring systems and provide the incentives, but you still need the people on the ground to implement the activities and change the way that forests and production interact on the ground.
And so what we are proposing is to test how MRV can be co-designed with the countries, but also the companies, to meet both private and public needs while meeting international standards requirements. They can work together on data collection, data sharing, by making some of them publicly available regarding the land use change and forest cover, and then allow reporting and verification on these pledges. This data collection on carbon measurement system could be extended on all commodities which are competing in the forest. It could be on rubber, could be on cashew, and could be on palm oil. And we could also duplicate it and test it in other BioCFF, CPF country portfolio. We are now considering, for example, to test it in cashew in Mozambique, in cocoa in Madagascar and Dominican Republic, in rubber in Indonesia, as an example.
So what we're proposing is that MRV systems, monitoring systems that are designed for forest and climate change, can actually become multi-function, multi-user platforms that help both governments and the private sector to meet and demonstrate the meeting of their commitments. If countries and companies will work together to establish data sharing protocols, to co-design the monitoring systems, to meet the needs of both the public and private sector, and work together on the ground to test these systems and improve them over time. And the result of this type of collaboration can be, first of all, the sustainability of these monitoring systems. The systems are being set up to meet primarily climate and conservation data requirements. But if the more users there are and the more ways that they can be useful to those on the ground, the more sustainable the systems will be over time. This type of collaboration can also result in improved collection of and use of data and efficiency of investment into monitoring. Right now, there's a lot of overlap between the types of information that companies need in order to demonstrate their meeting the commitments that they've made from the Tropical Forest Alliance, from the National Declaration on Forests, and from the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, with the types of data that are being collected by the governments in order to demonstrate their compliance with the goals that they've set for themselves around forest conservation and reducing emissions from deforestation. So by combining forces and aligning the way that data is collected and reported, this can create some efficiencies in the way that both companies and governments are collecting and reporting. And then finally, an improved monitoring system should support the ability to unlock additional finance. If we have REDD+ programs, forest conservation programs, that are able to measure their contribution to climate change mitigation, while in the same context, companies are able to measure their contribution towards zero deforestation production, and both are contributing to sustainable livelihoods. And in addition, we have the promise of results-based payments for success when these goals are met. We can leverage additional finance in the forms of climate finance, green commodity investment finance, and attract those companies seeking to buy zero deforestation commodities and products. In sum, what we're proposing is that by working together, REDD+ countries and sustainably minded commodity companies can monitor for carbon in cocoa, carbon in sustainable palm oil, or carbon in any number of forest-linked commodities. And so the link between chocolate and satellites is the monitoring system. The monitoring systems that can capture the important elements around forests and carbon and cocoa production. And they can also provide an important link between production and protection and between pledges and performance. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So before handing over to the floor for questions, I just had one additional question, which was, we talked about the companies, we talked about the governments. What about the farmers? What about the smallholder farmers? How can we unlock benefits for them?
Yes, that's a very important element to the whole piece. And the smallholders are really, in one way, what connects the companies and the governments in their efforts to improve production and protect forests. Improving the mapping of the forests and the availability and alignment of data in the surrounding landscape can also make data more available to smallholders themselves, can give them more information about the forests on the land that they use, and can provide information to those trying to provide support to smallholders on what types of support they need. And in contexts where land tenure and use rights are important, having better mapping and better data availability can support governments and smallholders in clarifying land tenure. And these types of clarifications can support the availability of loans, for example, to smallholders. So this type of information can be used to increase finance to them. In addition, when smallholders are playing a role in reducing emissions from the forest by improving their practices, they can become eligible for results-based payments that these programs will achieve. And so having a connection between the activity that smallholders are changing on the ground and reducing their impact on forests, and the monitoring systems which can capture that, can allow finance to flow to them in terms of results-based payments as well.
Thank you. Turning to the floor, do we have any questions? Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Musa Abujuam from Ghana. We are at a stage where we preparing for performance-based payments, but I can tell you that the first problem is that the low cost of carbon is not incentive enough for even communities or farmers to incentivize them to want to go into the program. And I don't know whether you can see any, especially when it's a bias, the carbon market is a bias market, not a producer's market. But other question is, do you think we can have a standardized MRV system across the countries so that something facilitated by FCPF or otherwise we have different systems and therefore you are limited to the buyer who accepts your system and not go elsewhere?
Yes, I'll give an initial response to both of those, and then Jean-Dominique jump in if you like. on the price of carbon, it is certainly the case that we are all here hoping that the demand for emission reductions goes up, and with that, the price. And that would certainly incentivize more action and provide more options and opportunities for those who are interested in changing their practices and reducing impact. In terms of the REDD+ programs, and by the way, Ghana is a leader in the programs that are supported by the FCPF, and we're really appreciative of the leadership that your program is showing to other countries in the process. One of the interesting possibilities about these types of collaborations between companies and governments in REDD+ is that carbon no longer necessarily has to be the driving financial force. There's a lot of movements in the corporate sector, in the companies themselves, to improve the ways that they are impacting the forest and the land around them. And so it's not only the price of carbon that is driving this type of change. It's sustainability commitments, and it's demand from the consumer side to have products that are less impactful in terms of climate, in terms of environment. So while we would love to see carbon price be sufficient to support these programs, we also understand that we need private investment, and we need other forms of investment to come in and build the incentives so that it's not only reliant on the carbon. And so that is the hope, that by combining forces and linking up with companies who are looking for sourcing opportunities where zero deforestation can be claimed and proven, that you bring in additional forms of finance beyond the price of carbon, unless and until eventually we get to a point where the price of carbon really reflects how valuable it is to reduce those emissions on the ground. And on the second question, the standardization of MRV systems, the benefit to working in a process like the FCPF is that because the FCPF has some view over all of the programs being developed, just by following the same standards, the methodological framework of the FCPF, you do build in some standardization across the system. So all countries in the FCPF process are required to report on certain elements. And so there's some level of standardization is built in. Now, the details of how that program will design the system and other things that they can monitor, that's left to the government. It's your system, and it's really up to you to tailor it to your needs. But there is some level of standardization built in, and I would add that by working with many of the companies who we've been talking to and you've been talking to, who also work in many countries, you can bring another level of standardization, because the companies are also interested in being able to compare data in their own operations, but also amongst themselves in the sector. So yes, we are working to create a level of standardization that makes it easier to see the impacts that you're having, both on the forest, but on a range of other environmental and social indicators as well.
Maybe just to add on the idea of combination of financing sources, and to add also to the carbon price, which is limited for sure right now. But we've got also some other inputs. We've got combination with private sector, which is research, but already inside the public finance, we've got, for example, the link between the Forest Investment Program, the FIP in Ghana, and maybe also we can have the JEF. So the idea is also to align some that kind of investment funds, which are then be able to obtain some reduced carbon finance too.
Thank you. We've got another question back here.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. Really interesting. My name is AJ, and I work with the World Bank in the Indonesia program. I'm lucky enough to work on some of these funds, and I'm also sitting here with my Indonesian colleague, and we're whispering about how satellite monitoring is such obviously an important part of MRV and something that can really bolster the ability to detect changes. But yet there's concerns about which satellites and which satellite information actually can be used in a way that's the cheapest and gives the best results for tropical forest deforestation, particularly around palm oil and rubber. So could you speak a little bit about the technology, what the options are? Is that something that you are comfortable to speak to? And if not, don't worry.
We are not specialized in satellite imagery, but what we can say is recently the World Bank developed a partnership agreement with Planet, which is just launched a new constellation of satellite, and that is giving to us the ability to have a daily survey with 3-meter resolution images. So these data are accessible for the whole world, I mean. And we can also use the Landsat imagery. But this new opportunity with Planet, I guess, will reinforce a lot the accuracy and the periodicity also of the images.
Yes, and as Jean-Dominique said, neither of us are the specialists on our team for satellite monitoring, but it certainly is a very fast-changing field. New innovations and approaches being developed all the time, and over time the cost is coming down. But certainly I think for countries that identify the types of monitoring that you need to capture the deforestation and the forest degradation, the technology and the right mix is out there, and we have teams available to help you figure out what the best mix is, and that's something that will evolve over time as the technology evolves and as it becomes more accessible for individuals to monitor in ways that in the past only large companies could do.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Paola Agostini, Global Lead for Landscape at the World Bank. So I would like to understand if, in addition to monitoring through satellite, can we also use some crowdsourcing and using people and the social media and interactions to really, let us know if the cocoa is deforestation free or not. And that leads to my second question, which is, are we going to see in the supermarket deforestation-free chocolate being sold? And, there were big movements when we had all this cotton and child labor in the past. And so do you think that something similar will happen in terms of the movements of the people that will react, the consumer react, if they come to know that there is deforestation in the chocolate that they eat?
The first question was related to, sorry. Right. That is actually an area where I think those of us supporting the governments and their programs, can learn a lot from what the companies are doing. The companies that we have discussed these ideas with, particularly from the cocoa sector, are doing a lot of really interesting work, working directly with smallholders, using handhelds, using apps to monitor the indicators and data that they are interested in collecting. And I think that's something that governments could really, it's one of the sort of tech transfer, knowledge transfer elements that would be really powerful in a collaboration like this. I know that in some RED Plus programs, there is an effort to involve communities in the monitoring. And whether that's using technology or just reporting when they're seeing deforestation or forest encroachment. So there are efforts to include that level of monitoring, but yeah, I think that's one of the places where we could learn a lot from what companies are doing. On the zero deforestation, demand for zero deforestation products at the consumer level, I see some experts out in the crowd here that can probably speak to that better than I can. Of course, we would love to see something like that. I don't have a sense for if the demand is out there or if it's starting to come. We see it, sort of creeping down the supply chain. But in terms of will we see that in chocolate and in other types of things that you can buy in the grocery store, I don't know. Do you have a sense for that, Jean-Dominique?
Yeah, maybe just to say that the MRV system could be used as a tool to demonstrate publicly that we are reaching this non-deforestation, but after it's up to the customers and to the traders to use this tool as a third party.
Wonderful, thank you. Please join me in thanking the panelists.
Thank you.